Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, and Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Hello, my name is Jenny Ferns, and I have a British accent, but I live in Florida. And I have written a book that started off as a memoir. When I retired, I had time to write and reflect on my life, and thought that maybe my family members might be interested in my memoir. So as I started to write it, I realized that I might upset a few people who were still living. Who maybe had some secrets, or there were a few skeletons in the closet that probably wasn't a good idea to bring them out into their real life. So I decided that I would take these stories and snippets of stories and information that my parents told me as I was growing up, and I turned it all into a fictional story. So whenever you write a story, you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it has to have some drama in it, and it has to have the good guys and the bad guys, and people change and go through changes and suffer, ups and downs in their life, and that's a story. And hopefully the readers fall in love with the characters and get caught up in the story and want to know how it ends. So that's just generally writing a story. So this story I took, actually it will be in 3 parts, but right now this is the first part. And the story of my family, the stories that I learned as I was growing up, were from before the Second World War in England, in around London, during the Second World War, through all that chaos and the Blitz and everything that happened in England during that time, and after the Second World War. So my book has 3 parts, and the before, during, and after the Second World War. And I turned the historical facts and the stories that my parents told me, I turned it into a book. And it's called Ripple Effect Because of the War. And this is the Second World War that I'm talking about. And the ripple effect is, if you see the picture, you can see a plane that drops a bomb. That's supposed to be a bomb that drops into a pond. Just like you throw a stone into a pond, it causes ripples, and the ripples just spread to the edge of the pond as far as they can go. So that is the story. The ripple effect of a war how it affected a family. So, and how it affects it at the initial stage of a war, and for months and years afterwards, as people live with the effects of that war on people and their lives and the surroundings. So there's always, unintended consequences to a war, and this story explains or follows a family as they deal with some of the trauma of that. Now, there's various themes in my book that might interest people for all different reasons. Number one, what life was like in England at that time, which was a long time ago right now. I mean, I was born just after the war, but this book starts before the war, and I did a lot of research to find out what people were wearing at that time, what the culture was like, what the entertainment was like, what the everyday life was like, what, for example, being British. Whenever you go into someone's house for a visit, you're invited to sit down and have a cup of tea. So there's a ritual to that. I mean, it's tea, it's not coffee. Coffee wasn't introduced into Britain until a lot later, probably in the Second World War when the Americans came. They liked coffee. So tea was the staple drink, the social drink. So you have a teapot and you have a tea cozy to keep it warm, and you pour it out, and you usually have milk. Pour the milk in first and pour the tea in, and then if you have sugar, then usually it was a lump of sugar. You would say 1 or 2 lumps, and you would have your sugar and stir it up. And then very often, if you're sitting down to tea with somebody, you would have probably some cake or biscuits. Okay, biscuits then are, if you translate it into American, it's cookies. Biscuits in American is a different thing. So we, in the story, you get to see these little rituals. You see everyday life in Britain, and almost like a movie, you get to imagine what it's like living in that place. Oh, so Kim is asking, what kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning to write this book? Well, the research I did was to find out the actual dates of various events happening in Britain at that time. So I would research, I would go to books, history books. Google is very good. Wikipedia was very good. These places would give me pictures of, for example, the bombed out places, and give me indications of which parts of London particularly were bombed. I would have pictures of the clothes that people were wearing at that time. I would find pictures of the cars that people drove. So Wikipedia and Google are absolutely amazing. And various, I would Google and I get articles that people had written. And of course, I would read other books about the war and see other movies about the war, and just get that flavor. So I get the picture of the background that all this is in. And I created a spreadsheet which had all the dates of events going on and the ages of my characters at each particular stage. So I'd have a little spreadsheet of that, and basically, so I would be consistent with the ages and what they were wearing and what was happening at that time. So that took a lot of work. But what I did to start with, I sort of plotted out what the story was from the beginning to the end. Did I include other sources like People, news articles? Yes, all of that stuff from newspapers, and certainly interviews with people. What do you remember about the war? What was that like? That kind of thing. So, and some, but for people who there's not too many people still left from actually in combat in the Second World War, because that was a long time ago. But this is actually the effect on a family of living through the war. So my main characters, it was a man and a woman. So before the war, I have them falling in love, having a romance. And then he goes off to the war. They get married before he goes off. And then she is left behind. And like so many other women, they fill in the blanks left by the men who've gone off to the war. Because in those days, it was the guys who went to war. So the women would go and work in the city. Women would go out and work in the farms and drive tractors and milk cows and things like that. And so something that they were never ever thought they would ever have to do. So the women became independent, became strong. They became very skilled. Some of them became skilled ammunition makers. Some went out after the bombing of London. It's called the London Blitz, when the Germans were heavily bombing Britain and trying to get it under control. Of course, they failed. But the women would go out with the ambulances and pick up dead bodies and try and clean up after all that devastation, put people into shelters. So one interesting thing about people surviving actually in the city of London during the Blitz, they would go and sleep in the underground, in the tube stations, in the underground train stations. They'd sleep on the platforms at night and then come up in the morning, dust everything off and go to work or do whatever it is that they still could do if their work was still there and hadn't got bombed. But a lot of people were bombed out, and I found many pictures of that and stories of people who had survived that. So that's the background of the actual war part. So there's in my story, I have the particular woman. She actually managed to evacuate herself and a young child out into the countryside, and she did some work with the evacuees. Now, what happened was that the government decided that because of the Blitz, or the beginning of the fear of the Blitz happening, they knew that the advance warning that the Germans were going to be trying to attack London. So they sent out an order that all the children and their mothers should leave London and be evacuated and be billeted in safe places in the countryside away from the city. So in this story, one child is evacuated and goes to stay with her aunt, and because her mother was working in the munitions factory and couldn't take care of her during the day. So this child lived with her aunt. In the story, what happened was that the munitions factory was bombed, and so the mother of the child was presumed dead. So the aunt adopted this little girl. So this little girl, then you follow this little girl's life as she grows up, first of all in the country, thinking that the mother is the woman who adopted her is her real mother, because she was adopted when she was about 3, I think. And you follow the life of this woman and her child through the war with an absent father, absent husband. And then when the father returns from the war, then things change, because as in many, many cases with people who've gone to war, they come home and they are very different because they have been traumatized, and they come home with what we now call as PTSD. In those days, it was called battle fatigue, and people suffered from battle fatigue. And very often the men would not like to admit that they were having nightmares and were scared, and that they were angry, and that they would be drinking to drown those fears and to help them sleep at night and so on. And that is very, very common. It happens now when people return from war, from combat, wherever. And that's a huge stress on the family. Somebody's asking, if you were born during those times, is there some part of your book you would like to change or add? No, I don't think I want to change any of that. I was born after the Second World War, And so I saw and felt the effect of the PTSD actually in my personal family. My father had some anger issues, which was a little bit difficult to deal with. I was kind of scared of him. In my story, he actually didn't suffer as badly as many people, but in my story, I embellished that, and my character, who very loosely based on my father, but I embellished that because it's fiction. So I made him suffer very badly from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what we call it now. And in the story, he became an alcoholic, and he became violent and withdrawn, and also attempted suicide. So, and that is very common these days. You hear of many people, combatants from many wars, who after a while they find that they can't fit back into society. They have a hard time with addictions, and many do commit suicide. So in this book, I actually created, the story of this man, and how his relationship with his wife, almost disintegrated. How his relationship with this little girl who was adopted, which actually wasn't his child in the story, and how that relationship almost disintegrates. But I also give hope, because in my background in the past, I was a psychologist, and I did deal with people with PTSD. And I knew from my practice that it is possible to make changes and to heal. So in this book, I gave that hope to my character, and I have had him progress from the pit of despair to hope. So that is the good part that comes towards the end of the book, where you see him finding hope and reconnecting with his family, and his family accepting and working with him to create a better life. So that's one of the themes, is about the effect of war on people's psyche, particularly the combatants, people in combat, which is similar to any military family that's been involved actually in war. Now, another theme that I have in there is that of the independent women. So instead of women staying home and looking after the kids while the husbands go off to work, because the men were called up to go to war, and they were drafted basically. They were conscripted, and some were volunteers, of course. So a lot of the women were left behind, and they became very strong and independent. They enjoyed working. They enjoyed having their own money. They didn't want to go back to the house, to being a housewife, and they wanted to stay and work. And sometimes that caused some strife within families as women become independent. I do have a little bit of a wartime romance that happens with one of the women, and because husband was away for so many years, and she fell in love with somebody else, kept it a secret, and dealt with that. And I'm sure there were many cases of that. And then I have the theme of the little girl who was adopted, growing up and trying to leading a fairly normal life post-war, which is fairly similar to my life post-war, going to a girls' school, having a first boyfriend, and all of the everyday things that a normal teenager girl would be doing at that time, going to the dances, and the music at that time. Yeah, that's in there too. I had to get that right. And then with this girl, when she became, I think in the story, she was probably 18. Yeah, I think I remember that. In the story, she was 18, and lo and behold, her biological mother shows up. Now that causes immense stress in the family, because this girl did not know she was adopted, and then suddenly her adopted mother shows up at the doorstep. And so there's lots of strife and anger and disconnect in the family because of all of that. So that reconnection didn't go very well, because the adoption was kept secret. The girl did not know she was adopted. So there's some teaching in there for people who do adopt children. Do tell them that they're adopted, and give them a chance to ask and think about if they want to reconnect with their biological mother. So a lot of themes that might interest people in this, people in the military, families who dealing with the stress of PTSD, families dealing with adoption issues, and families dealing with family violence, and women being independent and wanting their own life and their own work. So I had fun writing that, and some of it was based on stories that my family told me, and some of it was really based on my life growing up in England post-war. So the everyday background to my story, as I mentioned before, you've got some English customs and the English way of life at that time. I told you about the cups of tea when you go and visit. The standard of living in England at that post-war in London and some of the surrounding areas was definitely not as comfortable as in the United States. For example, most homes were heated by coal, big black lumps of coal that you put into the fireplace, an open fireplace, and use kindling to light it. It takes a little while for it to heat up, but once it heats up, it's very, very warm and burns for a long time and does heat up the whole house. Well, most of the house. If it's a 2-story house, you might get some heat going upstairs, but it's not central heating. It's basically one fire. If you're lucky, you would have some electrical bar heaters that you would turn on in the bedroom before you went to bed, just to heat it up a little bit before you go into an unheated room to sleep at night. But of course, the climate wasn't as extreme as many places in the United States. It doesn't get to be very much below zero. So let's see, what else? What other customs? Oh yes, because electricity was very expensive after the war, you would only heat the water up in your tank, in your hot water tank, just before you have a bath. By the way, I'm speaking more North American. In England, it would be a bath. So you would only heat up the water before you have your bath, and that would only be once a week. The rest of the time, you stand in the bathroom and just wash from the sink. Maybe you wash your hair in the sink, but you only have a bath once a week because it's too expensive to heat the water. So that's, it wasn't such a comfortable life, the everyday life, as it is in North America or some other places that we're used to now in these days in 2022. This was over in 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, before something called the Clean Air Act happened in England, where coal fires were banned, and you had to have smokeless fuel and use more electricity and central heating using water. So things changed since the Second World War in everyday life. So I had to make sure that I got that right. But of course, I remembered a lot of it because I did live in England for many of those years before I emigrated to, first of all, Canada, and then now into Florida in the United States. So hopefully people who read this book would be curious about everyday life in England, and hopefully we'll learn something about the stresses that people go through. I have a question. Have you ever wished you were born in the modern years instead of the post-war era? No. People always say about the good old days. Well, there were some things about the good old days. For example, children had a lot of freedom to run around in the cities, to run around in the countryside, to ride bicycles, to be told, okay, just go out and play and make sure you're home at tea time. So you don't have to tell people where you go. You just go because you feel free, you feel feel safe. If you're with a few other people, you can climb trees and ride bikes and go fishing. And I know that certainly some children in London, when they were growing up, they would go and play in the bombed out rubble of buildings that had been blown up, and so find curious things from the leftover from the house that's been bombed, like broken bits of crockery or things like that. So children had a lot of freedom, and of course, television was only just beginning. Probably when did television begin? Probably in the 50s. So people weren't sitting in front of the television. People would go to the pub for entertainment, where, of course, there was a lot of drinking going on, but the pubs were pretty much on very, very common. And that was a lot of the entertainment was there. Children didn't have phones like they do now. And phones in families, in a family phone in the house we'd have one phone. It would be, a rotary phone, and it would be in one place. And then if there were a lot of phones also for people who didn't have phones in their home, there would be phone booths on street corners where you put in your pennies and call your friends. So that kind of communication and freedom from that communication that we are used to now gave people more opportunities probably to socialize and to read books. Question: if you have an opportunity to write a different genre of book, which would it be? Well, I have 2 children's stories that I have written as a change from this, because this was work. Well, yeah, I had to make sure I got all the dates right, and it was a pretty big book, and it took a bit of work to actually get it done. And I thought after it was done, okay, well, maybe I'll do something that's a little easier and a little more fun. So I have 2 manuscripts of children's stories that I'm just working on right now. I'm working with an editor and an illustrator, and it's a children's book for children probably from 6 to 8 or 9, and has a princess and dragons and fairies and things like that. So that's what I'm working on, just completing right now. But surprise, surprise, it's still work. The work part is actually the writing part. Once you actually write, is actually fun, because then you once you've done your background and your research and you've planned out what's going to be what and who the characters are, when you actually write and do imaginary conversations between people, that's a creative part, and it just kind of happens. You just sit down and you just let your fingers on the keyboard just write, and in that process, I'm not really being critical about what I'm writing. I'm just basically throwing it down. And then after that, then I go back and, sort out the grammar and the punctuation and the spelling and all that. And then this is an interesting, if there are any newbie writers listening or established writers, I'm sure you know that it's very important to get your work critiqued and edited properly. So when I first started writing this, I found a writers group here. I live in the Villages in Florida, by the way. There's lots of writers groups here. And I joined a writers group and, present them with a chapter every so often, and then come back with suggestions and critiques and edits. And that was amazing, because that really helped to get another person's point of view. And you go back and you edit it and you polish it up. And then when I finally thought that I had finished my manuscript, of course, it's very rarely that it's finished that fast, then it's important to get a content editor. So somebody who looks at the whole picture of the book from beginning to end, and see whether the characters hold together, see whether the dialogue is right, see whether if there's anything that doesn't seem to work right. and the content editor gave me some great advice about certain chapters that she thought I could leave out because it was distracting, wasn't necessary. Certain aspects that she thought I needed to elaborate on. So the content editor was very useful. And then I had a line editor who just checked the spelling and the grammar and all the rest of that. So, it takes a lot to get a book ready for publication. And then you need to find either a publisher or find somebody yourself to do the cover. I found somebody on Fiverr to do my cover, and somebody on Fiverr to do the formatting, because you need to have page numbers and titles and things like that, and then you have to get it copyrighted, and you have to get so it's quite a process getting a book ready to be published. So I chose to publish self-publish because it's a process to get a traditional publisher. So I decided, well, I'm just going to publish it and then have fun promoting it, which I'm doing right now, and just see where it goes. So I published it on Amazon. So if anybody wants to find this on Amazon, there's a hard cover with proper front pieces, covers, and everything. That's a hardcover, and then there's a soft cover and an ebook. And the ebook, of course, is for a Kindle, which a lot of people love using Kindles or Nooks or whatever it is that you use an e-reader, or you can read it on your computer. And I also did an audiobook. I thought, well, this book is set in England. I have an English voice, and why don't I just read the book with my English voice, and I can act a little bit and pretend that I'm some of the characters and give them slightly different voices. So I did an audiobook, and that's on Amazon as well. I think it's zero. It's for no cost right now, I think. So it's very reasonable on Amazon right now. I love Amazon. It's great. And let's see. I'm working on a sequel, and I have a mini little book, a short read book that I made about one of the characters in this book, and that is a free little book that I give away to anybody who's interested in that, which is like a little teaser for this, I suppose. And so if people want to contact me, they can go to my writer's website, which is jennyfernswriter.com. And I have a Facebook site called Jenny Ferns, which is on Facebook. And of course, you can get my book on Amazon if you write in the whole title, which is Ripple Effect Because of the War. There are other people who've got other books that are about ripple effect, probably about ripples with your muscles or something like that. I'm not sure. So please, if any of your readers, please find my book. And if you like it, please give me a review. Reviews are very valuable because that's how people will let you know what they like about the book or what they don't like about the book. Because whenever I buy anything, like from household stuff, very often I look and see what the reviews are. Is this a good refrigerator? Things like that. The reviews are very important to know what people think about what you have. So if you have any comments, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. I also have an email, which is jennyfernswriter.com. So maybe that's easy to remember. So I have a Facebook page, I have a website, and I have an email, and my book is on Amazon. So it's been a pleasure to speak to you, and let me know if you read the book and what you think about it. Ripple Effect Because of the War by Jenny Ferns. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Reader's Magnet for allowing me to come here and tell you about my book and my writing process, and and to connect with the world. Awesome. Goodbye.